Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
There's a moment, and you've had it, I know you have, where you walk past a mirror and you don't fully recognize the woman looking back at you. Not because you've aged, not because something is wrong exactly, but because somewhere along the way you stopped really looking. You got so good at moving through your days, tending to everything and everyone that needed tending, that the woman in that glass became a kind of stranger. Familiar, yes. But known? Truly known? Maybe it's been years. Maybe it's been decades. And here's what nobody says out loud. That moment of not recognizing yourself? It doesn't feel like a crisis. It feels like Tuesday. That's the quiet kind of loss that doesn't get a name. It's not grief, exactly. Nobody died. Nothing catastrophic happened. You just drifted. The way a boat drifts from its dock. So slowly, so gently, that by the time you notice the water between you and the shore, you can't quite remember the moment you let go of the rope. I want to talk about that drift. And I want to talk about what it means to find your way back. Because here's what I've come to believe in my bones. After years of sitting across from women who carry the weight we carry, women who built entire worlds with their hands and their hearts and their sleepless nights, the mirror isn't the enemy. The mirror is a doorway. But most of us learned somewhere early and somewhere painful to treat it like a courtroom. We walk up to it, we make our case, and we find ourselves guilty before we've even said a word. Guilty of not being smaller, guilty of being too tired, guilty of the years that left their marks on us, as if living fully were something to apologize for. We peer at ourselves with this particular brand of cruelty that we would never, not in 1,000 years, direct at someone we love. Think about that for a moment. Really sit with it. If your daughter, or your granddaughter, or the young woman down the street who reminds you of yourself at 30. If she stood in front of a mirror and said the things you say to yourself, you would put your hands on her shoulders. You would look her straight in the eye. You would tell her, with everything you had, that she was wrong, that she was beautiful, that the story she was telling herself was a lie someone handed her a long time ago and she never had to keep carrying it. You would say that without hesitation. And yet, here you are. I think about the women I've known, the ones who spent 40 years making sure the house ran and the children were fed, and the holidays felt magical and the sick were tended and the grieving were comforted. And I think about how many of them arrived at this season of life and looked up, blinking like they just stepped out of a long, beautiful, exhausting tunnel and thought, now what? Who am I without all of that to do? That question, who am I now, is one of the most frightening and most sacred questions a woman can ask. Because it doesn't have a quick answer. It doesn't come wrapped in a bow. It sits with you in the quiet of early morning when the house is still and the coffee is hot and there's nobody needing anything from you for just this one small moment. And in that quiet, that's where the mirror lives. Not the glass on the wall. The other one, the internal one, the one that reflects not how you look but how you feel. Who you are, underneath the roles you've played so beautifully for so long. Here's the truth that I want to settle into the ground between us like a seed. You are not the sum of what you've done for others. You are not your productivity or your usefulness or your capacity to absorb other people's pain. You are a whole, complex, irreducible human being with unspoken truths still living in your chest, with desires that maybe went quiet for a while but never fully disappeared, with a self that has been waiting patiently, faithfully, for you to come back to her. The mirror isn't asking you to become someone new. It's asking you to finally meet the woman who was always there. That's where we begin. Let's go back. Not all the way. We don't need to excavate every wound, but just far enough to understand how it happened. How a woman with a full, beating, wanting heart gradually learned to put herself last on a list that never seemed to get any shorter. Because it didn't happen all at once. That's the thing people don't understand about this kind of slow disappearing. It wasn't one dramatic moment. There was no single morning where you woke up and decided, today I stopped mattering to myself. It was quieter than that, so much quieter. It was the first time you swallowed what you actually needed because someone else's need felt more urgent. It was the decade, maybe 2, of running on 4 hours of sleep and telling yourself you were fine, you were strong, as if exhaustion were a character flaw rather than a perfectly reasonable response to an impossible amount of loving. It was the way you learned to make yourself smaller in rooms where you felt too big, or too loud, or too much. That word, too much, that gets handed to women like a life sentence. You started editing yourself. Not in one dramatic revision, but in 1,000 tiny ones. A sentence left unfinished. An opinion swallowed with your coffee. A dream filed away under maybe someday, in a drawer you eventually stopped opening. And here is the part that breaks my heart. Every single time you did it out of love. That's the cruelest part of this whole story. The self-abandonment wasn't negligence. It wasn't weakness. It was, in its own painful way, an act of devotion. You were so committed to the people and the life you were building that you just kept making room for everyone else until there was a corner left for you, and eventually even that corner got donated to the cause. We were taught, weren't we? Not in classes. Not with textbooks, but in the 10,000 subtle lessons that girls absorb before they're old enough to question them. Be agreeable. Don't make it about you. Ask how everyone else is doing first. Make sure the people around you are comfortable before you allow yourself to be comfortable. And if you do have needs, well, soften them. Dress them up. Apologize for them before you even speak them. The woman who speaks plainly about what she needs, difficult. The woman who takes up space unapologetically, a lot. The woman who says no without a lengthy explanation, cold. And so we performed the softening. Over and over, until the performance became second nature, and second nature became the only nature we remembered having. I want to pause here and name something, because I think it's important. This isn't about blame. Not toward the people who loved you imperfectly, not toward the culture that handed you an impossible script, and especially not toward yourself. Blame is a dead end. It's a room with no windows. What we're doing here isn't excavating fault. We're excavating understanding. Because you cannot find your way back to yourself if you don't know the road you traveled away. So let's keep walking gently. There's a particular kind of grief that settles in on women in their 50s, 60s, 70s. A grief that doesn't always announce itself as grief. It arrives wearing the clothes of restlessness or irritability or a bone, deep fatigue that no amount of sleep seems to touch. It's the grief of a self that was set aside too long. The grief of all those quiet whispers you didn't listen to. The ones that said, this isn't quite right for you. The ones that said, you deserve more softness than this. The ones that said, you are allowed to want things for yourself. You didn't ignore those whispers because you were careless. You ignored them because you were busy. Because someone always needed dinner, and someone else had a fever, and someone was having a crisis, and the car needed an oil change, and honestly, who had the time to sit with the quiet whispers of their own soul when the noise of the world was that loud? But here's what whispers do when they're not heard. They don't go away, they wait. They burrow down into the body, into the shoulders that never quite unclench, into the jaw that tightens at nothing in particular, into the chest that sometimes feels like it's holding a breath that hasn't been released in years. The unheard self doesn't disappear, it just moves underground. And it waits for you to get quiet enough to hear it again. I've sat with women who cried and couldn't tell you exactly why they were crying. And I want you to know, that kind of crying is not confusion. That is the body finally getting a chance to say what the mouth has been too busy to say. That is the soul doing the unburdening it has been waiting years to do. If you've had those moments, those tears that seem to come from nowhere, at nothing, in the car on the way home from somewhere ordinary, that isn't weakness. That's not you falling apart. That is you starting to come back. There's a concept I return to again and again, and it's this: the self is not destroyed by neglect. It is only buried. A garden left untended goes wild and overgrown, yes. But the roots are still there. The soil still remembers. And something extraordinary happens when you finally turn your attention back to it. Things begin to grow that you forgot you'd ever planted. You are that garden. And the fact that you're here, right now, willing to sit with these words, willing to feel the ache of recognition as I name these things, that is not a small thing. That is the first gesture of return. That is you picking up a trowel and saying, I haven't forgotten. I haven't given up. I am willing to tend to this. The woman in the mirror has been waiting for exactly this moment. And she is not angry that you took so long. She just wants to be seen. So what does it actually look like coming back? Because I want to be honest with you here, the way a real friend is honest, not the way a greeting card is honest. It doesn't look like a montage. It doesn't look like a sudden awakening where you wake up one Tuesday morning, throw open the curtains, and feel completely reborn. That's a lovely story. It's just not usually the true one. The true one is slower, and in some ways that makes it more beautiful. Coming back to yourself looks like a series of small, almost embarrassingly ordinary moments. A morning where you sit with your coffee for 10 extra minutes and you don't fill the silence with your phone. A conversation where someone asks what you want for dinner, and instead of saying whatever you'd like, you actually pause and check in with yourself and say, you know what? I'd really love Thai food tonight. And then you notice, maybe for the first time in a long time, that your own preference felt worth stating. That it took up a little space in the room, and the room didn't collapse. Those moments are the turning. They don't look like much from the outside, but inside, they are seismic. The first thing that has to shift is something I'd call permission. And I know that word might feel strange, because who gives you permission to be yourself? Shouldn't you just be? But here's the reality that I think every woman in this season of life understands in her body, even if she's never said it aloud. We have spent so long waiting for external permission that it became invisible to us. We stopped noticing we were waiting. We just lived in a low, grade-holding pattern, doing the next necessary thing, tending the next necessary person, until one day the necessary things started running out and we realized we didn't know what we were doing this for anymore. Permission, it turns out, doesn't come from outside. It never did. It was always yours to give. But you were told, in those 10,000 subtle lessons, that it wasn't. That you had to earn the right to your own desires, to your own rest, to your own becoming. You never did. So here is what I want to offer you practically, because I am a firm believer that insight without action is just beautiful sadness. It moves you, but it doesn't move you. So let's talk about what the turning actually requires. It requires getting reacquainted with your own interior, and I mean that literally. Most of us, by this point in our lives, have gotten very good at knowing what everyone around us is feeling. We can read a room. We can sense when a child is carrying something unspoken, when a friend is struggling beneath her smile, when the atmosphere at a family gathering is about to shift. We are exquisitely tuned instruments for other people's emotional weather. But ask us what we're feeling on a given Tuesday afternoon, and there's often a pause, a reaching, a slight bewilderment, like being asked to describe a room you haven't entered in years. I'm fine is not a feeling. Tired is closer, but it's usually the surface of something deeper. What lives underneath the tired? What does the tired have to say if you sit with it long enough to actually listen? This is what I mean by tending the inner garden. It begins with attention. Just attention. Not judgment. Not a project. Not a self-improvement campaign with goals and metrics and a timeline. Just the simple, radical act of turning toward yourself with the same gentle curiosity you'd offer a dear friend. What do you love? And I mean the real things, not the things you're supposed to love, not the things that made sense to love when you were 32 and building a life from scratch. What delights you right now in this body, in this chapter? Is there something you've been wanting to try that you keep dismissing as silly? A class, a trip, a creative pursuit that got filed under someday? What would it feel like to open that drawer? What do you need? Not what does your body need, though that matters too, but what does your soul need? More silence, more connection, more beauty in your everyday environment, more laughter, the deep kind, the kind that surprises you, more time in nature or with your hands in the earth, or sitting by water that doesn't ask anything of you. And here is the one that tends to sit the heaviest. What have you been pretending is okay that isn't really okay? That one requires courage. It might be a relationship that has been running on fumes and habit for longer than you want to admit. It might be a version of your daily life that looks perfectly respectable from the outside, but feels like wearing a coat 2 sizes too small. It might be a story you've been telling yourself about what you deserve, which is to say, not much, that you inherited from someone who was wrong about you. You don't have to blow your life up. I'm not here for that kind of drama, and honestly, neither are most of us at this point. What I am here for is the quiet, brave, entirely revolutionary act of deciding that the truth of who you are deserves to be lived. Not performed, not apologized for. Lived, there's a word I love, sanctuary. It means a place of safety, a place of refuge. And here's what I've come to understand: you can build one inside yourself. Not just in a space, not just the reading chair by the window or the garden in the early morning, but in your own interior. A place inside where the noise of the world, the expectations, the old voices, the long list of what you should be, where all of that gets quieter, where you can hear yourself think, where you remember with your whole body that you are someone worth knowing. That sanctuary doesn't get built in a day, but it gets built with each small act of self-recognition. Each moment you choose your own truth over your own silence. Each time you look in that mirror, that real mirror, the internal one, and instead of launching your usual prosecution, you just look with kindness, with curiosity, with the willingness to see what's actually there, rather than the story you've been telling about what's there. Some days you'll look and see a woman who is tired and a little uncertain and not entirely sure what comes next, and you will love her anyway. Some days you'll look and see a woman of extraordinary resilience, someone who has survived losses and disappointments and impossible years and is still standing here, willing to feel things, willing to grow. And you will feel something that maybe isn't pride exactly, but is in the same family as pride, a recognition, a respect. And some days, more days than you might expect once you start, you will look and see a woman who is, against all the odds of a culture that tried very hard to convince her otherwise, becoming more fully herself with every passing year. Not less. More. That is the gift hiding inside this season that nobody talks about enough. Yes, there is loss. Yes, there is grief. Yes, the body changes and the roles shift, and the world doesn't always know what to do with a woman who has moved beyond the years of being primarily useful to everyone else. All of that is real. But there is also this freedom, a kind of freedom that younger women can sense coming, but can't quite access yet. The freedom of knowing yourself well enough to stop pretending. The freedom of having earned, through all those years of living, a certain settled confidence in your own worth. The freedom of caring a little less about the opinions that used to cost you sleep. The freedom of choosing, perhaps for the first time, a life that is actually yours. The mirror is waiting, not to judge you, to witness you. I want to tell you something that I mean with every part of myself. You are not late. I know that voice, the one that creeps in during the quiet moments and whispers that too much time has passed. That you should have figured this out sooner. That the years you spent lost in the doing, the tending, the holding everything together were years wasted. And now here you are, trying to find yourself at an age when other people seem to have it sorted. That voice is persuasive. It sounds reasonable. It even sounds kind sometimes, like it's just being honest with you. It is lying. There is no late when it comes to becoming who you are. There is only now. And now, this exact season, with its particular quality of light, its specific texture of hard-won wisdom, is not a consolation prize for missing some earlier window. It is, in ways that are difficult to explain to someone who hasn't lived it yet, the most potent time of all. Because you know things now that you couldn't have known at 35. You know which battles cost more than they were worth. You know the particular freedom of a day with no performance in it. You know, maybe for the first time, the difference between what you chose and what you simply inherited without questioning. And that knowledge, that hard, purchased clarity, is not nothing. It is not the leftover of a life. It is the distillation of one. There's a Japanese concept, wabi-sabi, that finds beauty in imperfection, in the impermanent, in the worn and weathered and incomplete. A cracked bowl mended with gold. A weathered piece of driftwood shaped by years of tide. The idea that the marks left by time and use and living are not flaws to be hidden but stories to be honored. I think about that concept a lot when I think about women in this chapter of life. The lines, the softness, the particular look in the eyes of a woman who has loved deeply and grieved fully and kept showing up anyway. That is not deterioration. That is character. That is a life written on a body, and it is extraordinary. But here's what I really want to leave with you, more than any concept or metaphor. I want to talk about the homecoming, because that's what this is when you strip everything else away. This whole journey, the looking in the mirror, the honest reckoning, the permission giving, the slow returning, all of it is a homecoming. A coming back to the woman who was always there underneath the roles and the responsibilities and the long years of beautiful, exhausting devotion. And homecomings, as you know, are not always tidy. Coming home after a long absence means walking through rooms that got dusty. It means finding things exactly where you left them and feeling the particular ache of that. Oh, this was always here, waiting. It means some rearranging, some opening of windows, some sitting in the middle of it all and crying a little, not from sadness exactly, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being somewhere true. That is allowed. All of that is allowed. What does it look like, practically, this homecoming? I think it looks different for every woman, because we are not a monolith. We never were, and one of the gifts of this season is finally giving yourself permission to stop trying to fit the template of someone else's redemption story. Your homecoming is yours. It doesn't need to look spiritual if you're not particularly spiritual. It doesn't need to look dramatic if you're more drawn to the quiet. It doesn't need an audience. But I do think, I've seen this enough to believe it, that it tends to have a few things in common. It tends to involve honesty, not the brutal kind, not the kind that tears things down for the sake of tearing them down, but the gentle, steady kind. The kind where you start telling small truths. To yourself first. What do I actually feel right now? What do I actually want? What have I been saying yes to out of habit, out of fear, out of the ancient conditioning that my needs matter less than everyone else's? And then, slowly, you start telling those small truths to the people around you. Not as declarations, not as confrontations, just as the natural overflow of a woman who has finally decided her inner life is worth speaking aloud. It tends to involve pleasure. And I don't mean that in a grand way. I mean it in the most ordinary, everyday sense. The reclamation of small joys that you stopped letting yourself have, or stopped noticing you were having. The smell of something good on the stove. The particular piece of an afternoon with a novel and no agenda. The feeling of your body in water, or in movement, or in rest that is actually rest rather than collapsed exhaustion. Beauty, sought out deliberately, flowers on the table, not because company is coming, but because you live there and you deserve to be surrounded by things that delight you. It tends to involve community. Not the obligatory kind, not the showing up because you should, the smilant because it's expected, the relationships maintained out of history rather than genuine warmth. But the real kind, the women who can sit across from you at a kitchen table and say the true things without flinching. The friendships where you don't have to translate yourself, where you can show up as the full, complicated, sometimes exhausted, sometimes hilarious, always worthy woman you actually are, and be received as such. If you don't have that yet, if the community around you feels more like performance than presence, let that be something you reach toward. You deserve to be known, not your competence, not your usefulness, you. And it tends to involve, perhaps most importantly, forgiveness. Oh, I know. That word. Forgiving others. We've talked about that our whole lives. We know the theology of it, the psychology of it, the importance of releasing what we carry. But I'm not talking about forgiving others right now. I'm talking about the harder thing. The thing that women of our generation were almost never encouraged to do. Forgiving yourself. For the years you spent making yourself small. For the times you betrayed your own knowing because someone else's certainty felt louder. For the dreams you set down and never picked back up. For the anger you swallowed until it became something else. Sadness or silence or a wariness with no clear source. For not knowing sooner what you know now. You didn't know what you didn't know. That sounds simple. But it is one of the most releasing truths available to a human being. You were doing the best you could with the understanding you had in the moment you had it. And the fact that you understand more now is not evidence of past failure. It is evidence of growth. It is the whole point of a life lived with genuine attention. Forgive her. That younger woman who was trying so hard with so little support, in a world that asked enormous things of her while offering her very little in return. She deserved more grace than she got. You can give it to her now. It's not too late for that either. And then Look in the mirror, not to inspect, not to evaluate, not to compare what you see to some version of yourself from 20 years ago or some image you carry in your head of who you're supposed to be by now. Just look. Look at the woman who raised children or chose not to or wanted to and couldn't, and all the grief and love and complexity that lives in any of those truths. Look at the woman who built things and lost things and rebuilt things, who loved imperfectly because love is always imperfect, and did it anyway with everything she had, who got knocked down by life, by loss, by illness, by disappointment, by the particular cruelty of a world that underestimated her, and got back up. Not always gracefully, not always quickly, but up. Look at the woman who is, right now, in this moment, willing to sit with words on a screen and feel them land somewhere real inside her chest, who is brave enough to admit that she has been a stranger to herself and who is tentatively, lovingly reaching back. That woman is remarkable. I want you to know that in the place where you keep the things you actually believe, not as a motivational declaration, not as something you paste on a mirror and read dutifully each morning until it starts to feel like wallpaper, but as a known thing, a settled thing. The way you know your own birthday, the way you know the smell of rain, with your whole body without having to think about it. You are remarkable. And this season, this one, right now, with its aches and its questions and its strange new freedoms, this is not the chapter where your story gets quieter. This is the chapter where it finally gets true. The mirror is not your judge. It never was. It is your oldest, most faithful witness. And when you look into it now, really look with all the hard-earned tenderness you have spent a lifetime learning to give to everyone else. What you will find, looking back at you, is not a woman diminished by time. You will find a woman forged by it, and she has been waiting with infinite patience to finally be home.